Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Exile's Return. Episode 2. Chapter 9. Kellen POV. Photographed and injuries documented and tended to by a human doctor. Kellen gave her statement to the human feds. All that she knew, she only told exactly what happened, leaving out that she had killed one wolf, but stated she had injured him. No lies about what had happened on Pack territory. She would not incite more rage from her alpha. Technically, he and his men in the Pack had not hurt her at all. Nil wounds were in fact inflicted by the Alpha, Beta or previous Alpha, all of whom she used their human names for. She was returned to Tony and Lauren's house where her children were. She couldn't allow Arya to heal her because it would be suspicious to suddenly have no wounds. Kellen fell onto her knees and hugged her children tightly to her, kissing them repeatedly on their heads. They were all crying at the state of her, touching her gently and asking if it hurt. She didn't want them to see her like this, but it was the price of living in the human world. Their distress at her being missing was evident. Even when she tried to use the bathroom, they all trailed her. She just let them. She and Arya didn't want to let them out of sight either. So it was fine. She and the triplets had slept in the same bed every night that week. Tim had come straight over to Tony's house the minute Eric had informed him she was back and safe. He had stayed that first night and held her in his arms all night. While she had spent the night staring at her babies, it wasn't often one of them would actually spend the night. Usually they would have S3X multiple times and then one would go home. Sleepovers were rare. There was no S3X. She had too many injuries and she was not interested either, and neither was he. He was just worried about her current state and wanted her to know he was there for her, to gene on. She was grateful for that. He could only stay on the weekend due to having to be in court all week. But it was nice to actually have him around. He had often hugged her and just cuddled her for no reason. He played with the kids and was generally nice to have around. The way the feds had found her, bruised, battered and bloodied and running screaming from the Crimson Ridge Pack or Browning's Corporation to the humans, had landed Derek in hot water, though she knew it was most likely going to be swept away by the Wolfen Council, as they would find a way to get him off the hook and out of the human world's trials, and he would never ever see the inside of a real human prison. It would probably take some doing or time, but it would be done. Pay the right people the right amount and anything could go away. Jaya knew that he had been charged with killing and causing grievous bodily harm, as Eric had drawn up the charges and was going to prosecute the case himself just like he had said it was going to. Eric was very unhappy and could see why she had stated she would not be able to bring them in as a client, called him all sorts of vile names when he'd collected her from the airport and took stock of her condition. He'd been the one to take her to Tony and Lauren's. Eric had announced no work for the following week, and so she had spent it with her children at Tony and Lauren's. She felt safe there. It was a gated home with security cameras, and she didn't think that Derek or any of his men would know about them, or at least she didn't think they would. Tony had taken to calling him a prick, and Arya were never more than 5 feet from their children at any given time. It was a long night every night. Arya promised to keep their pups safe while she slept. She would monitor from within. No wolf would get near their babies again. She had allowed Arya to heal her a little each day. The distress in her children's eyes was too much to take, and after just 7 days she was fine, healed up and back to normal. She knew it would have taken longer for a real human, but she just shrugged it off and said she was healthy and a fast healer. She guessed. Going back to work and sending her babies off to school again worried her. Alpha Blaine had gotten a good look at the 3 of them. She was certain that he'd pick Nate as his grandson. He might be a bit confused about the twins. They were smaller and looked a year younger, but she didn't doubt he would see just how much Nate looked like his father. Spitting image even at that age, she had grown up with him. She recalled what he looked like at 5. So would Alpha Blaine. And now Derek also knew she had children, a family. What would he do with the information? She had defied him at every turn, not gone back willingly, killed one of the men designated to get her, assaulted his beta and run away again, back to the human world. A place she'd found solace and sanctuary from her banishment. Not only had she defied him, she had also not declared her children to her pack, and certainly had not told him they were his. 2 things she should have done, especially the last one. Keeping an alpha from his offspring was a deadly game. At some point when they got older, she knew his wolf would sense it, and definitely feel it once they got their own wolves. The hunt would have been on then, but that was years away and so she had never thought about it. That was future Kellen's problem. J-Law wasn't about to go telling him either, he was already angry with her and she wasn't about to go and make him 100 times more angry. He had already lost out on punishing her and had clearly planned to. He hadn't even gotten to tell her what that punishment would be. That must really enrage him even more. Alphas did like to strike fear into their enemies, loved the power they had and could push around. Fear was how they protected their pack and members from other alphas. But because she was so well ensconced in the human world, known to many here as an expert divorce lawyer and had many wealthy and well-known clients to represent, her alpha was going to have to deal with her here in the human world, play by human world rules or it will just appear that he would have come and abducted her again. Kellen was pretty certain he was not going to like that at all. Wouldn't risk it probably, being trapped in the human world risked his pack to attacks from other alphas. Every day for her now, though, was going to be like a ticking time bomb, however, waiting for him to sever her connection to his pack. If his father didn't say anything and she had no idea if the man would, he hadn't really reacted to the sight of the children, perhaps he had not made the connection at all, perhaps a vision of them was not enough for him to sense his own bloodline. Alpha Blaine had been kind to her, never severed her connection, continued to pay her school fees, didn't cut off her pack card, thanked the goddess she had used it to pay for the nanny while in school, though had stopped using it the minute she started working for Eric and earning her own money. He had also never sent anyone to track her down and force her back. He clearly had a good heart, a caring person. Unlike his son, she wondered why he had turned out so bad. He hadn't been like that when she had been growing up in the pack. Being back at the Crimson Ridge pack brought up memories of her family, and she wondered how her mum and dad were, her brother Bradley, were they all okay, or had he punished them as much as her? She hoped not. Kellen had not spoken to them in the 6 years she had been gone either, they had not tried to contact her, or come and see her, never attempted to track her down either. She wondered if they even missed her, or were they just as disappointed and annoyed with her for that one error she had made? Or had Derek forbidden them from seeing her? Kellen felt a ripple of guilt come from Arya at the thought of the loss of their family. They had all been so close, much loved by all of them, and she had loved them right back, still did and missed them all the time, just had to push the feeling aside and not think about it. That was the best way to deal with it. Don't feel guilty, Arya, you did what you did to protect our pups. So stop with the guilt. I know, but sadness wafted from her. It is fine, it was a long time ago. I do not blame you, you know that, so please stop feeling guilty about it. Arya sighed in her mind, she had always blamed herself for us being told to leave and never come back. Kellen didn't blame her. She had been going to leave anyway, live on campus for the last 2 years of her degree, so as not to have to see him with his mate so happy and in love. Thankfully, she still hadn't had to witness it. The woman had not shown her face during her brief, very brief trip to the pack. Arya, you are amazing, I couldn't ask for a better wolf. She told Arya, thankful for just how fast Arya was. Not many could outrun her. Only 2 from her pack had ever managed it, when she was in wolf form and running at full speed, the current and former alpha. Even growing up in Crimson Ridge pack, everyone had been amazed by Arya. She was so beautiful, her pale silver fur practically glowed in the moonlight like she was white, with her cute grey snout and paws. When she had run with her pack under the full moon for the first time, her mother had told her she looked like the moon herself. What was fun was that she could hide in the snow so well of a night that it was always fun to play with the boys, go out in the winter time and hide in a snowdrift, then wait and see how long it took them to find her, after she had mind-linked them to tell them. They'd never find her. A hunt, they had all enjoyed, Alpha Derek's wolf Havoc especially. He'd always loved to hunt and was good at it, typical alpha genes, she guessed. A good memory from her teenage years. Arya had always been able to run like the wind. Once again, she had proved how amazing she was even in human form. Arya had been able to outrun Jackson and his wolf Apollo, something she had been proud of back in the day, and now could still be. Still faster than the beta, ha ha ha, suck it, she thought with a chuckle. She would love to tease him about still being slow. She and Arya had always teased them when growing up. You're all slowpokes, she would tease them, throwing leaves and sometimes mud at them or snowballs depending on the time of the year. It had always enticed them and their wolves into a game of chases so they could try and prove her wrong. Their wolves were going to grow to be the strongest and fastest in the pack, the Alpha's designated unit to help him protect and secure the pack. It had been a game pure and simple, one that she and Arya knew they actually couldn't win, not because she couldn't outrun them because she could, but because of who they actually were. The future Beta, Gamma, and Delta, they would use other tactics to bring her down. Splitting up and forcing her into a corner was their favorite, setting a trap, and they were good at it. She had often wondered how many planned traps they had made and discussed about her and Arya to always be able to hunt and push her where they could corner her in different places all over pack territory. If they couldn't, they had simply called for backup, and he would come for her, Havoc ever present to give him the burst of speed he needed to drag her wolf down to the ground. It had always been all in good fun. She sighed heavily. No, that's enough of a trip down memory lane, let's not recall any more. Agreed. Arya huffed, seemed a little annoyed, but seeing as he had just kidnapped them and separated them from their pups, we shouldn't go down memory lane. He had changed from the fun, playful man she had known to an angry, hateful man, well, where she was concerned anyway. His beta was still loyal to him, so it was likely he was still liked and respected by his pack. It was just her he hated, and for so very long. Would he ever let it go? She doubted it. His anger was still so great even after all this time. She had hoped with years passing it would have lessened, that one marking of his mate just once and she would have healed and been left unblemished. Kellen's wounds were much more severe from her killing than the 3 tiny claw marks she had left on Luna Sophia's face, and she had healed up, not a blemish left on her. How could it be that he is still so angry with her? Clearly 20 years of friendship meant nothing to him. She closed her eyes. Don't go there, Arya whined at her. The past hurt her too. Chapter 10. Derek POV. He had spent the past week having his men investigate her whereabout. She had not returned to her apartment, had been taken somewhere else, and where he had yet to find out. He couldn't actually blame her for that. She had run off back to the human world, probably right into Eric Stanton's protection. She felt like she belonged there now, he figured, because he had once ordered her to leave, and told her to never come back. She had nowhere else to go, so it was not surprising that she had made a life for herself there. Derek had wolves watching her apartment for her return, but 7 days and nothing. The feds had come for him the following morning. After her escape, he had gone willingly, no point in arguing it, not when she had ran right into their arms in such a bloodied and wounded state, directly from his pack Jans. He had been hoping she would still be with them and he could come across her. That way she could send him out and Arya and she would identify them as their mate, which could solve everything. But she had not been anywhere near him, at hospital for treatment of her wounds. She couldn't just heal herself overnight in the human world. That would be extremely odd, and draw her unwanted attention to herself. She was smart. How could she claim her wounds were real if all healed, and then he could claim she had fabricated them if that was the case? He had been slapped with a human world federal charge of KG and causing grievous bodily harm, due to taking her across several states against her will. It was a federal case. Although he had not actually laid a hand on her, the men who he'd sent for her had injured her, but so severely that the charge was laid against him. Due to that they were under his orders. He'd shaken his head. Humans. He had informed them he didn't know the men, and they had bolted already. When in reality, he had sent them home to bury their son and brother. He had paid them more money due to the death of the man. He had not expected Kellen to fight so hard, let alone kill a wolf in an attempt to get away. But he should have known it. She was a warrior's daughter and had trained with him and his unit most of the time. The girl could take care of herself. But he had also not known that she was desperately trying to get back to her 3 children, who he had not known about and separated her from. It was no wonder she fought so hard, killed in an attempt to get away, and refused to come home at all. The feds had produced the video footage of her killing, the photographic evidence of all her wounds once she had, when she'd gotten away from him and run straight into the arms of human law enforcement. He'd gotten to see the state of her right hip, bruised and ripped open, and her chest covered in dark bruising and many scratches from where she had been unceremoniously tossed out of the van and onto the ground, unable to protect herself from the sudden impact due to having her hands bound behind her. He had found it extremely difficult and hard to keep Havoc's growls and snarling at bay at those officers in charge of questioning him, with the way they had worded everything, made everything sound as though he had injured her himself, and on purpose at that. Havoc had wanted to rip them apart for accusing him of hurting our mate. Derek's legal department was on it, and though he had gotten bail in no time, he had spent the day behind human bars. He had to hand over his passport and agree not to leave the state, annoying since his mate was now on the other side of the country. None of the humans in his shared cell had come near him. His wolf had been so close to the surface the whole time that they feared him right away. Havoc was ready to rip through them all for the slightest bit of disrespect from them. It had only made Derek smile, to be honest. Humans were so afraid of him and all he had to do was glare at them. Though the 2 officers questioning him had smelled of fear, they had not shown it. He could see why they were good at their jobs, could portray confidence and authority even when scared of the man in front of them, a couple of times when he had really struggled to contain. Havoc and his anger had shown on his face. He'd seen them both back into their chairs slightly and eye him wearily. The only reason they were alive was because they were in the human world. If this had happened on his territory, he doubted Havoc would have allowed them to survive. In his cell he had paced back and forth. Havoc did not like being caged in a cell at all. The 3 humans in the cell with him had stayed along the back wall well away from him. Havoc had turned and growled at them once, and they all had gone wide-eyed and bolted to the back and stayed there. Fear flowed freely off of them the whole time he had been in the cell with them. One day behind bars was worth it. It would show Kellen and Arya he was willing to take punishment for her treatment, even though at the time she had not known they were her mate. He was sorry for her treatment, the injuries sustained to her, and the separation from her pups. Getting to her was the new problem. If he attempted to take her or her 3 pups, how? the humans would be all over him again. Dear goddess, how was he going to handle that? 3 pups, he had yet to lay eyes on them. Had no idea how old they were, whether they were boys or girls. He didn't even know if they were half-human or wolfen for that matter. If they were half-human, could he ever bring them in? What about their human father? This is a nightmare. He did know she had had them in the human world, because she had certainly not come to the pack hospital to birth them on each occasion. She'd been all alone to deal with it. When he had sent for her, he had not even thought about whether or not she had found a mate, gotten married to a human, or had had a family, children. He'd seen her on TV and Havoc had insisted on bringing her home, no ifs, ands or buts. It was a must. Havoc had finally coughed up the truth to Natha, that when they had seen her on TV, he had felt that he missed her. It had put an ache into his heart, and when he had heard her speak, her soft but confident tones, a desperate need to be near her had fallen over him. The desire to be with her filled him so quickly and deeply that he wanted to once again have her right next to him. A need that burned inside him so strongly he couldn't ignore it. Not that he had told Derek at the time, might have solved a few problems in the way he'd brought her in. Derek might have actually gone to her in person, might have, though it was likely not. He'd probably still have sent Jackson or Stephen maybe. He had hurt her that day, and who was to say she would even see him? He could have gone and apologized for what he had done to her 6 years ago, though now he knew that the minute he would have come face to face with her, they would both have known what they were to each other and problem solved, or at least he liked to think so. His current daydream, her currently being a single mum of 3, had shaken him, but he would have dealt with it. It had been a week since this news had come to him, completely out of the blue. Everyone in the room had been utterly shocked by her announcement. His dad, his beta, and he himself had all been completely unaware, and her sudden begging and bringing them up had him feeling very guilty indeed. He had not done a full investigation of her, prior to having her collected. He'd simply tracked her address from her company, and that had been it. It hadn't even crossed his mind that she wouldn't be alone out there. He was now a little concerned about Eric Stanton's relationship with his mate. What if that human was her man? He was feared and respected in the human world, someone who could not only look out for her and protect her, use all his human resources to get her back at all cost, which he had proved he was already willing to do. He had acted very quickly in her favor. There was something going on there. If her children were his, there was going to be trouble. She would not likely leave them behind, and he couldn't see Eric giving them up, not to the man who had just kidnapped her and, in his opinion, brutalized her. Derek had already looked into the man himself. He was 45, fit for his age, did taekwondo and had a black belt, so he could put up a fight, though Derek knew he would be no match for him or Havoc. The man was a well-respected and a feared prosecutor. He was liked in the human society around him, was wealthy, and the CEO of a prestigious law firm. He was no longer married, had once been, but divorced 10 years earlier. He was considered good-looking. He had short blonde hair and grey eyes, with a square jawline. His build was good, but only by human standards. Derek was twice as fit and boasted way more muscle. But if he was Kellen's man, he could see why. Power and protection were a must for a lone she-wolf. He sighed and ran his hands through his hair. Who was to say they weren't seeing each other and it just wasn't public knowledge outside? It could be the reason she did her internships at his company and then started working for him right out of university after passing her bar exam. Derek couldn't find anywhere that they had actually worked on any cases together. They did work from the same building, and she would be attracted to him and his power. That thought elicited a low growl from Havoc. Down boy. Derek smiled. Once she sends us, it will be all over for any man she is with. Arya won't stand for others touching her once she knows. and you co it. Another growl came from his beast. He did not like even thinking about another wolf or human touching what was his. But right now she was gone, had vanished for the past 7 days. She had gone somewhere and he didn't think it would be a hotel, not when she had kids. Likely gone to the children's father's place of residence if they didn't live together. This could have pushed them to move in together. Though he had surveillance on Eric Stanton's home, she was not there, or if she was, no one had seen her and she was inside away from prying eyes. It was annoying and worrying to not know where she was. Derek's legal team were pushing for him to do a press conference in order to help him out in the human world, and clear his name. He was actually standing in the middle of his office reading ITER supposed to be, but his mind kept wandering, how could it not? When he didn't know where she was. It wasn't that bad a statement it would have him admit to sending men to collect her, but that he had not in way shape or form instructed them to hurt her. He was to formally apologize, not an issue. He was willing to do that, and claim that he'd only wanted to talk to her, that he would like to have mediation with her regarding what had happened. His legal team had advised him that the quickest way to deal with the human charges against him was to get them dropped altogether. If he could convince Kellen to agree to let them be dropped, that would be the end of it. The question was, could he get her into the same room as him for mediation? She would likely have to come this way due to the human world restrictions placed on him, not that he cared about those. If it came to it, he would ignore them altogether. His mate was more important than some restrictions on his movement around the human world. Kellen was afraid of him, that much he knew. The words she'd heard him say over the phone would have her clearly believe he didn't care about anything that happened to her, when in actual fact he did care, more than she could comprehend at this moment in time. Just walking into a room with him would clarify a lot, but the way he had brought her in, the injuries she had sustained, was going to cause doubt even if she scented him. He would have to work on trust, or he would. He loved her already, couldn't wait to be her mate. She had always been fun and playful with him during their love affair. Due to the anger and aggression that had been pouring out of Havoc at the sight of her injuries and her disheveled state, she could only have mistaken his anger for what she probably thought it was, her refusal to come home and her utter defiance at all his requests. Alpha's orders were law and no one was supposed to ignore them, and she had defied him at every turn. Stubborn she-wolf, he smiled to himself. He also didn't know if Kellen knew his previous mate bond was over, done and dusted, and that he was glad it was. If she didn't, then stepping into a room with him was going to cause quite a shock to her and Arya. Derek also believed right at this moment, the only thing he had going for him was their past relationship. Before Sophia. And he would use it if he had to, anything to gain her trust. He was hoping that Arya would be able to sway Kellen. He'd already dealt with Kellen without Arya. She was scared of him. Arya's bond with Havoc he was certain would be instant and strong. They had known each other a long time. Arya was a cheeky wolf and Havoc had enjoyed hunting her and tracking her when she was hiding from him and the boys to tease them. He had also enjoyed pouncing on her, not that he and Arya had ever done anything. Wolves stayed out of human counterpart relationships unless it was their fated mate. But they had gotten along and been playful with each other. She was a pretty wolf too. He'd never seen anything like her wolf. Havoc purred at the thought of Arya now, her shiny silver/white coat, the pretty grey of her snout and feet. She wasn't a large wolf or hadn't been average size, but she had been amazingly fast and he had liked being the only one who could catch her. She always got Havoc to really push himself and put everything into the chase. Not something he had to do often. Chasing her around their pack was going to be good fun, only pouncing on her would mean something different altogether now. His attention was dragged away from internal thoughts by Jackson as he got off the phone with a sigh that sounded part annoyed, part worried. He'd yet to question Jackson about if he had feelings for Kellen, though he was certain he did, he knew that Jackson would never betray him. A boy and twin girls it looks like, about a year apart from Pete's judgment, he just laid eyes on her. No photo, just a quick glance in the car as she drove into the secured car park of her building. The three in the back seat. Havoc whined in his mind, someone gave her pups, that was our job, someone beat us to it. Derek sighed, he too felt a little lost at the news she had used the word family, but none of them had found a human marriage license or certificate with her name on it, so it didn't appear she was married. Did she come home alone? He asked, not really wanting to know the answer in truth if it was a no. Yes boss, just her and the three pups. Are hey pups? Or are they human? He mused out loud. No one in the room even attempted to answer him. Jackson knew him better than anyone, and would have picked up on his tone. Stephen, his gamma, sat silently staring at a computer screen. He'd barely said a single word in a week. Once he had informed his most trusted, Jackson, Stephen and Ethan. His gamma. Stephen, the one he'd entrust her safety to when he wasn't around, had stared at him for a full minute, then had just turned around and walked away, and as of yet, no one knew the man's thoughts. He would talk when he was ready. He had been chasing her with Jackson to try and stop her from leaving the pack territory but had failed. It was possible he had guilt over her getting away, considering as the gamma it was ingrained into his every fiber to protect the Luna with his life. Ethan, his delta had simply sighed and shook his head, then said, well, what are we doing about getting her back then? To his dislike, his father had informed his mother and siblings. His mother had stomped into his office very angrily, glaring right at him, and he knew instantly he was in trouble. Nothing like a mother's displeasure at something her child had done wrong, the child could always tell. This moment had been just like that for him. He had raised his hands in a gesture of surrender and he'd state, I know I did wrong, but that had not stopped her from storming across the room and starting to slap him about anywhere she could, while he tried to block the hits. Havoc had stayed out of it. She was the only woman in his world who could get away with hitting him, well, probably one of two now. His father had pulled her away and calmed her down. He'd simply apologized, to which she'd stated flatly, it's not me you need to apologize to, son. At his agreed response, she had stormed off out of his office, and his father had followed. Derek knew his father was trying to calm her down further. Later on he okayed the press conference and allowed it to be set up with human reporters. He designated the spot as to the front of the PAC's architecture firm, just 45 minutes from PAC borders, then set about adjusting the wording and response of his official statement to the press. He would be taking minimal questions and he would stay on topic only. It was the next day that he received the shock of his life. His father walked into his office and dropped a photograph on his desk right in front of him. The boy is definitely yours, he had stated, sounding very annoyed, jabbing a finger at the boy in the photograph. It was a picture of three children, a boy and twin girls, looked to be about 4 and 3 respectively. The date on the bottom of the photograph showed it had been taken a year ago. His heart ached terribly at the sight of them. They looked so happy, all playing at the beach, laughing up at the camera, probably Kellen taking the photo. The boy had his arms around the girls. He could see the boy's fingers were digging into their sides, he was tickling them and they were all laughing. All three of them had her jewel green eyes and were shiny with joy and happiness, but all of them had his blonde hair. Goddess, the boy looked just like him when he was that age. Havoc was growling in his mind, racing around like he was ready to rip out of him ours. He snarled at him. Derek felt the drawing to them, and couldn't tear his eyes from them. They are all mine, Derek replied without hesitation. He trusted Havoc's opinion 100%, he felt drawn to the two girls in the photo as much as he did the boy. His heart ached so badly, and when he touched his fingers to the photo, pain seared through him. What had he done? Did she know that day? She had been begging him for just 2 minutes of his time, but he and Havoc had just found their fated mate, and he'd not cared about anything else at all, hadn't wanted her touching him at all, to be honest, recalled glaring at her touch. Something he had enjoyed not more than 3 days earlier, the day before he had met his fated mate actually. Had she been trying to tell him? Had Arya only responded the way she had in order to protect her pups, his pups? And he'd sent her away, pushed his alpha order at her without a single thought about the consequences, due to his mate's injury. This is a nightmare. We have to fix it, Havoc whimpered at him, guilt, regret and sadness washing over him. He'd been just as responsible for what happened to her that day, he'd been present to assist in giving the order, he'd lost so much that day and didn't even know it, shunned her and never thought about her again. If he was completely honest with himself, neither of them had until the day they'd seen her on the TV, so full of life and confidence. All of them, son? His father questioned him, his tone very quiet. Yes. Havoc is of the same opinion. Triplets? You have really messed up. You know that, right? Yes, he sighed. I'll find a way to fix it, we'll get her back, and she'll know what we are to her. Not going to be easy, son, his father stated flatly, then left the room, closing the door behind him. He was about to get the biggest beating of his life, and he was going to have to take it. They were her grandbabies, and she'd not gotten to see them born, never gotten to hold them, spoil them, or watch them grow up. All the things she would have wanted, all the things he wanted, and he'd royally screwed up. Gut-wrenching guilt was eating away at him. Goddess help me to not die when she comes for me. His most trusted friends were all in his office. They had been sitting around discussing protection detail for her, who was going and what to set up officially in the human world. None of them said anything, they were all just staring at him. He could feel their eyes on him, yet he couldn't even look at them in return. Too much guilt for sending her away, and in such a delicate condition. A condition she'd had to deal with on her own. She had been friends with all of them all their lives, a year younger than him and Jackson, but the same age as Stephen and Ethan. She had trained with them due to her father's rank as top warrior, and he was the one training them too. Then when Arya had come along so darn fast, one could keep up with her, she'd fit into their group without issue. Even though she was a girl, she had never had a problem roughhousing with them or teasing and playing with them. She was just one of the group. Made them all laugh many times. Now it was all very wrong. He'd done this, split her apart from the group, from all of them, sent her away. And they'd all lost a friend that day due to his actions and thoughtlessness, and now the utter devastation of his decision was finally revealed to him. He had lost his childhood friend, his one-time love interest, and his children, who had not even been known to him. He doubted very much they knew who he was. Did she even tell them what they were? Growing up in the human world, it could be that she had never mentioned Wolfen society to them. It was a secret to be kept from humans. Was she raising them human? Probably due to his order to never come back. He saw movement in the corner of his eye and finally looked at Jackson, Stephen, and Ethan. They were all walking towards him. He wondered how Havoc would handle them trying to beat the life out of him. Havoc was quiet. Probably wouldn't interfere. They did deserve it, though being the alpha was unlikely to happen, he guessed. Even if they were his childhood friends, respect must be given or punishment would be dealt out. They all walked behind his desk and looked at the photo in his hand. He had yet to put it down, a part of him couldn't. His children, his heirs to the pack. Out there for all this time, completely cut off from the pack and its protection, unprotected, and he solely responsible for it. How could he blame her for any of this? Goddess, he was going to have to beg for forgiveness at some point. She would never forget what he had done or how she had to be on her own with them all this time, how he had been the one to cause her to leave. Cute pups, Jackson stated calmly. Must be a handful, 3 alpha pups all at once. Ethan mused aloud with a half-laugh. Stephen said nothing at all, still silent on the subject of Kellen being his alpha's mate and now mother to his alpha's pups. Still no one knew what was going on inside his head. Rafe had yet to emerge either. Chapter 11. Kellen POV. She was called to the conference room on Eric's floor of the building. It was 11 in the morning and she had been back at work for just 2 days and she had been diligently trying to catch up on her caseload. Although most of her clients had been very understanding of her situation as it was very public knowledge what had happened to her, Eric had published one of her photos of her injuries sustained. She hadn't been all that happy about it and had only allowed the one where she was still fully clothed, the original photo of how she looked upon being rescued, before the police had stripped her down to document all the injuries. Reporters were still camped outside her office building to try and get an interview with her, to which she had so far refused. As she walked into the conference room she saw not only Eric Stanton seated at the table but also all the senior partners of the law firm. She drew in a steady breath when they all turned to look at her. Some had pity in their eyes, others had admiration and a few didn't seem too concerned at all. Eric nodded to the seat next to him. She walked over and sat down as was directed. "What's going on?" she asked him quietly. "Mr. Browning is about to hold a live broadcast press conference. We as your attorneys were informed by his attorneys to watch it. It's about your case against him," he informed her. Kellen froze. This was not going to be good. Why was he even responding in the human world way? No wolf cared for that stuff. If it wasn't wolf in society then it didn't matter. She had in all honesty thought he would just sever her tie with the pack and then let his pack lawyers sort it all out for him. Not wanting to deal with her in the human world, currently she actually felt safe, for if she suddenly went missing again or anything happened to her, it would all point directly at her alpha and he would be dragged back into the human world spotlight of suspicion, be investigated again. Kellen knew he would not want that at all. This was likely going to be a blanket statement from one of his pack's legal team in order to placate human world public opinion. She could only imagine his human world businesses had taken a hit, that his stocks in his companies had probably fallen as well, not that she was keeping track. In fact, she had refused to watch the news in the past 10 days since her ordeal. Not wanting a reminder or recap of it, she had lived it, that was enough, and she didn't want her children to have to see her in that state again. The TV was turned on and to her surprise she watched as he strode toward the podium set up, outside the front of one of his businesses. Behind him in the background, all wearing immaculate dark gray suits with black shirts and red ties, pack official colors, were Jackson, Stephen, and Ethan. As he walked directly towards the podium she could see his muscles straining against his suit. He was wearing a black suit with pinstripes, probably gray, she couldn't tell from here, a dark gray vest over a black dress shirt, that matched the boys' suits, and a red tie, his alpha dress code. Arya stood to attention, her ears pricked up instantly, and she too was watching. She had not gotten to see him that day, having been kept forcibly away due to them being drugged with wolfsbane and the use of silver cuffs. She whined as she laid eyes on him for the first time since leaving the pack. The father of her pups. He was dressed to kill, that was for sure. No female reporter would ask him anything that would incur his angry look directed at them, and that was how he most likely wanted it. He wanted all of them drawn to him, she supposed, their lust and desire eradicating any torrid questions that might make him unseemly to the public eye. He was clean-shaven and his hair neatly slicked back the way he liked to wear it. He looked better with it slightly tousled, she though absently, Arya agreed, Kellen checked herself. Stop looking at him, remember what he did to you, she told herself internally, also reminding Arya she could feel that her wolf was more interested than she should be, probably due to their connection through the triplets, but it must be kept in check. He cleared his throat casually and tapped the microphone. "L will make a short statement this morning regarding Miss Kellen Freeman and what happened between us." He hushed the reporters with a simple wave of his hand as several questions were yelled at him from many reporters. "Firstly, I would like to apologize to my childhood friend. Yes, I have known Kellen since we were small children. He was trying to establish a friendly long-time relationship with her and gain the report's trust, she thought. Sneaky bastard, but not to be unexpected. If she was his lawyer she would have suggested as much. My apologies, Kellen. Yes, I did send for you to return to our hometown. I, however, did not order for you to be kidnapped, drugged, or injured in any way at all." Kellen snorted. "Yeah right," she thought. "I received that black envelope and the wolf's bane inside it. Your intent was clear. Very clear. I was also completely unaware of your single mother status, as not having spoken to you in 6 years. If I had known you were a mother of 5-year-old triplets I would certainly have never, ever, sent men to bring you home. I would have come myself, to your very door." Fear was starting to creep into her every fiber. He knows he was speaking directly to her, letting her know that he had fully investigated her and found out about the triplets, her children. His children. Their children. That she had kept from him. "I did send 3 letters prior to this particular unfortunate incident, to request that you come home," he went on. "My intent was to simply discuss with you your outstanding debt to my family in regards to us having paid for your law school tuition, which was to be repaid by you by working in the Browning Corporation's law department over the course of the first 5 years out of Seoul, which you agreed to do and even signed a contract for." Oh, his lawyers were good. They were trying to make it out that she was the one in trouble, not him, redirecting the reporter's focus to her and her outstanding debt that she owed to him. Bastard! He produced the document which she recognized as the PAC agreement for her tuition fees for 5 years legal work with reduced wages to pay the money back. "Due to the current circumstances and the unfortunate and terrible incident that has happened, which deeply upsets me, I would like to take this opportunity to try and offer an olive branch to you. First, this contract, gone." She watched as he tore it in half. "You owe me nothing, I consider your monetary debt repaid. I would not wish to cause you any more grief or by forcing you to repay this sum of money. Secondly, I would like us, you and I, to sit down and mediate the current issue between us. Please take into consideration our long-standing friendship, Kellen. You know very well I never laid a hand on you. Your statement on record says as much. You fully acknowledged that all harm that was done to you, was by the men who took you against your will. Thirdly, I would like the opportunity to personally apologize to your children for any distress, or mental trauma they may have suffered due to your disappearance or your current injured state upon returning home. I am certain they were very upset and distressed, and I would like to personally assure them I am of no threat to you or them for that matter, none whatsoever." Kellen noted that his eyes never left the camera in front of him. A shiver ran down her spine. He was speaking directly to her, letting her know he wanted to come for his children, her precious babies. Not going to happen. If he forced the situation, it would all backfire on him, and the humans would all badmouth him again, for they had human birth certificates and I'll take questions now, he informed the reporters. You said you grew up as childhood friends? Is that actually true? A reporter yelled from the crowd. Yes, Kellen and I were once very close. Indeed, he smiled that devastatingly handsome smile of his, that could make any she-wolf or human woman's heart melt, and she didn't miss the insinuation in his voice that belied they had had more than a friendship, implying with one sentence they were lovers. "How close?" another reporter yelled out, a female voice. "We dated for a time, just over a year if my memory serves me correctly." His mouth twitched at the corner, a suggestive smile. "Then how could it come to this, KG, and grievous bodily harm you're charged with?" "Yes," a male reporter yelled. His smile was gone in an instant. "Correct, those are the charges." He did not deny it. "However, I would like Kellen and to sit down and mediate the matter, as it is not what it seems. It is all a simple misunderstanding that can be resolved with common sense." He looked right at the camera. "Kellen, please agree to meet me. All your lawyers are welcome. I will agree to any time and place that suits your schedule." He then simply stepped away from the podium and walked away. Kellen watched as Jackson, Stephen, and Ethan all followed him back into the building and out of sight. Many eyes in the room turned to look at her. She knew what they wanted to know, so she answered them. "Yes, we went out for a while. It ended badly," she stated flatly, for it had ended very badly. She had lost everything and he had gained everything. Even right now he was trying to take more from her. She wondered if he had told his Luna yet, or if she was still in the dark about his 3 pups. The TV was turned off. Kellen got up and walked away. She wished she'd never had to watch his press conference. He had used his sex appeal and his charm to sway the crowd, probably filled it with female reporters at his request. He knew he was devastatingly handsome and would use that to his advantage. All wolves do. It's how they got away with things in the human world: charm and sex appeal. Due to the constant training, most wolves had the body type desired by all humans. Trim, taut and terrific, or muscled up to the hilt is what she heard most humans say. Humans as well as wolves loved a good 6 or 8-pack abdomen and deep lines that dropped off down into their jeans. Drool-worthy. She walked into her office and stood staring out the window. It was an overcast day and there was no sun shining. "God matches my mood," she thought absently. She was not simply going to give up her children to him. No, Arya agreed. She turned at the sound of her door closing and found Eric Stanton walking towards her. She knew she had left the conference room before they were done with their questions, but she just didn't want to deal with it, with him, to be honest. "Did I miss something? Or did I read between the lines correctly?" he stated without hesitation, staring directly into her eyes. "Now that depends on what you read between the lines, Eric," Kellen said calmly. He was no fool and she was certain he had picked up on the underlining tone of the press conference. "Her children. Is Derek Browning the triplets' father?" Eric asked, as direct as always. His grey eyes bong into hers, daring her to lie to him. "Yes," she stated honestly. "I told you before I was kicked out at 20, that he was the one to remove me from the corporation. I did not know I was pregnant at the time." "Why didn't you tell him when you found out?" "He was getting married when he kicked me out," she shrugged. "I didn't want to ruin that. That is not who I am. I honestly was happy for him." Eric stared at her for a long moment. "If you didn't know you were pregnant, you can't have been that far along, and you said he was getting married. How long between your relationship with him and hers with him?" Trust Eric to pick up on that. "I'll be totally honest with you, he broke up with me and was engaged to her within a matter of a day." She sighed. It had been that quick, but in the Wolfen society that's just how it was. Once you found your mate, nothing else mattered. Eric stared at her, completely shocked now. "No wonder it ended badly. I guess you did a lot of yelling and screaming." "No, actually, I didn't. We weren't serious." "I knew that, but unfortunately she slapped me in the face and I slapped her back. Hence not a good ending." She shrugged again. She had spoken the truth. He was thinking, his arms now folded across his chest. It was a good minute before he spoke again. So what response do you want to make? He returned to his original reason for coming to her office. I don't know yet. She walked over and sat down behind her desk. I need to think about it. Do you think he's going to order a paternity suit? I doubt it. It was clear he had no doubts about the triplets being his. A paternity suit was necessary. A custody battle then. Kellen sighed heavily and rubbed her temples. Not in the human world, she thought. No, he'll just come along and claim what is his regardless, Arya piped up. I know, Arya, it's just a matter of time. Unless we play hardball and stay publicly in the human world. Then stay we will. Hardball it is, Arya huffed, clearly willing to fight for her pups, even against an alpha. Arya was just as defiant as Kellen was herself. She and her wolf were well suited to each other. Kellen. Eric's voice interrupted her internal dialogue with her wolf. Don't know, he'll probably wait for my response before making a decision. He is very careful in his decision-making process and he will be tactical in his approach. He'll want to make sure it's all in his favor before starting a battle of any kind. Give it a day or 2 or 3, to come up with a response to his press conference. Kellen chuckled. Make him sweat, you mean? Yes, let him get annoyed and aggravated, it might just show his true colors to everyone watching. All right, I will think up a response. She nodded and watched as Eric walked out of her office. Just don't piss him off, Kellen. Arya huffed. This is a battle, but technically we can't win it. I know. He's an alpha and has all the power in Wolfen society, but Arya, we are in the human world and only so much weight can he throw around without outing our kind. Do you really want to go to battle with him? Arya asked, and Kellen could feel the worry ebbing off her wolf. She was currently pacing around in her mind as she tried to decide what course of action she would agree to go along with. Chapter 12. Derek POV. 3 days passed before he got to see his mate on TV, 3 long days for her to respond to his press conference. It was 1930 his time, 1630 hers, end of the day for her. He wondered if that was on purpose. Probably. Derek was under no illusion as to whether she understood that he knew about the triplets being his. He had made that very clear to her. No one else may have picked up on it. Only wolves themselves would understand the importance of an alpha stating. He'd have gone right to her door, and his personal assurance to her children that he was of no threat to them. But to the humans watching, he just looked like a man knowing he was in deep trouble and trying to dig his way out of a hole. There was a podium set up out the front of Stanton & Co. law firm. A whole team of lawyers were lined up behind it. He counted 10 and Eric was not among them, he noted. He was sitting in his office along with Jackson, Stephen, Ethan, and both his parents. A loud growl came from Havoc the moment he saw her. Eric Stanton was walking right next to her and his hand was on the small of her back. He looked extremely close with her. Barely an inch between them. Was this his way of laying claim to her in view of the public? Derek didn't know, but he too did not like it either, and Havoc was stalking around in circles, rope able at seeing even a human male's hands on his mate. It didn't help that she was dressed very provocatively as far as they were concerned. She was wearing a black silk blouse that clung to her body in all the right places as the wind pressed it against her slender waist he knew fit perfectly into the palm of his hands, and that black and red checker end skirt, skin tight all the way down to the bottom of her backside, then fell into pleats that were maybe 3 inches long. The pleats flicked up as she walked, leaving her legs bare for all to see. From her high thigh area all the way down to the black stilettos she wore. Pack colors, her realized. Her makeup was perfect for her, lightly done, showing her natural beauty, her supple lips a dark purplish pink hue that made him want to just kiss her until it was all gone. He just wanted to reach up into her hair that was wound tight into a bun and yank her hair loose, pulling her head back roughly with a fistful of her hair, making her pretty mouth gasp open for him and possess like never before. Havoc was prowling and snarling in his mind, knowing every man could see what was his, knowing they were thinking about touching her, probably more than touching her. She should never dress like that except for him. She would understand that when they got their hands on her, skirts that short were a no unless in their bedroom. Eric walked her all the way to the podium. Then leaned down and spoke directly into her ear, his lips brushing against the skin. Havoc wanted to rip the TV off the wall and destroy it right there. She turned and smiled up at him, a genuine smile, a happy smile. Derek's fists balled on his knees. He wanted to punch that man as much as Havoc wanted to rip his head off. She should only ever smile like that for him, not some human male. She turned to the crowd and nodded, the smile disappearing. Thank you all for coming today. I would like to make a personal response to Mr. Browning's statement from 3 days ago. I would like to ask you all hold any questions you may have until the very end. I will answer 3 questions and nothing that is pure speculation or only asked to create gossip. Derek couldn't help to smile, so very professional. She had clearly done this many times before. He was very proud of her for attaining her law degree and commanding so much respect. He'd always known she bright and intelligent, that she would make a great lawyer, and he had told her as much when they had been friends and lovers. Told her he knew she would make a great asset to the PAC's legal department. Sometimes she had blushed at his compliments. Goddess, he wanted her back. He refocused his thoughts as she took a deep breath to make her response, then those jewel green eyes turned directly to the camera, just as he had done, so darn beautiful. I do not believe you meant me no harm, Mr. Browning. This letter you sent, with clear intent. She held up the black envelope addressed to her and the letter as well. He recognized it right away. It states clearly, I will have you brought in, and inside the letter was this vial. She produced the long cork-stoppered vial with the single wolfsbane flower in it, and tapped it on the top of the podium gently. To those watching today, this flower is known as wolfsbane and is poisonous, the drug that was detected in my system, forcibly injected by the men who took me that day on your order, which you have admitted to sending them to get me, was in fact found to be wolfsbane, the very same thing as this flower. She tapped the vial on the top of the podium again. Sent by you, Mr. Browning. He was frowning now. This was not how he had thought this was going to go at all. Did he even want to hear the rest? Probably not, but he would not miss the opportunity to see her with his own eyes no matter what. As for the monetary debt to you and your family, she held up a check. I will pay it back. This check for the full amount will be in the mail directly after this press conference, and my legal team, she indicated to the men standing behind her, have even calculated any interest owing, and it has been added, as my way of showing you'll mean to be free and clear of you, no lingering debt, period. Havoc was snarling now. He was very unhappy with this term of phrase. Derek had to remind him that she did not yet know they were her mate. As for the mediation which you requested, I am not interested in hearing what you have to say. The courts will decide if you are guilty of the charges laid against you. I think that you know as well as I do, what happened. She tapped the vial on the podium again. I'll also know that I did try to contact you within your 3-day time limit given to me. My phone records will show as much. I also believe you know this to be the truth as well, as I called the number on this tetter. Your right-hand man, Jackson, picked up the phone if I'll recall correctly. I am also not interested in you personally meeting my children to apologize to them. I would advise you to stay away from me and my children, deal directly with my legal team. I believe you know of Eric Stanton by now. He is the head of my legal team. Eric stepped forward to the podium. Please direct all further questions, queries, or statements to me personally, please Mr. Browning. Any further harassment of my client will only add extra charges to the list you already have." He then stepped back. "I'll answer 3 questions now, if you have any," she offered to the gathered crowd. He heard many questions yelled at her. She would have the opportunity to pick and choose which to answer. The first she chose to answer: "Did you really grow up with Mr. Browning, within the Browning Corporation?" What a useless question, Derek thought. She had produced a check to repay him. It was clear she had. It was a question that didn't need clarification, and she knew it. Smart girl, one question completely wasted by the reporters. "Yes, I did." The second question she answered: "Why did you leave and not return to fulfill your contract?" "I was told to leave by Mr. Browning himself, and told not to come back, ever. I simply obeyed his order." This answer allowed the crowd to feel that she had no debt to fulfill, he supposed, making it seem as though he was in the wrong again. The third question: "Miss Freeman, do you really believe he meant to harm you?" "Unfortunately, yes, I do." There was an actual hint of sadness in her voice, that reached her jewel-green eyes. They seemed to dull somewhat with her reply. It hurt him deeply to know she really believed he would harm her. His ch3st ached. Derek sighed. Havoc was furious. So her stance is to defy him yet again, and very publicly, in the human world, where it is hard for him to get to her right now, this very moment, due to current circumstances. Kellen looked directly at the camera and sighed heavily. "Mr. Browning, if you would like to formally remove me from your corporation, go ahead. I will find another to affiliate with." Then she simply turned and walked away, Eric right there beside her, his hand on the small of her back again, and her 10-man legal team followed. He could feel all eyes on him. Kellen was indeed outright defying him. She had just told him to sever her from the pack and she would find another to join in. Did she even know how dangerous that would be for her and their pups? Yes, any pack could take them in, then kill him and his pups, or spend years harming them, torturing them, using them to hurt him. If they got wind that she was his mate, she would suffer the worst fate. He could not have that. "I want round-the-clock warriors at her apartment building. I want the pups watched at their school as well, no interference for now, unless danger arises," he stated flatly. He would protect what was his even if he wasn't allowed to do it himself. He would send everything to protect them. This was extremely serious and dangerous. For such an intelligent person, how could she be so stupid? Any wolf watching this event unfold in the human world would understand exactly what she had meant. His enemies would all be creeping out of the woods to try and entice her to them. Would she even know who they were? Who to avoid altogether? He doubted it. Jackson was already on the phone, as was Stephen. It was the first time Stephen had spoken in weeks in front of Derek. His gamma blood, he guessed, was boiling in his veins, his need to protect her and the future heirs to the pack outweighing whatever had kept him quiet all this time. "Son," he heard his father's voice. "I know," he said in reply, trying to keep fear for his mate and pups out of his voice. "I can sort it out. I'll fix it," he muttered. Havoc was not happy. He didn't believe he could fix it. "I fix it," he snarled inside Derek's mind. "Just need to go to Arya." "Might not work, Havoc. She's truly upset at us. She needs time to calm down. We have to plan to keep them safe, then make a decision about bringing her in again, and how to do it so the human world doesn't see it as another killing and send the feds again. Might take some time, buddy. I won't give up. I want her back too. Promise?" his beast asked. "I swear to you, Havoc, by the goddess, I will get her back. She will recognize us as her mate and everything will fall into place." "Son, you know your mother and I have to go away to help your brother deal with his human mate and her very stubborn family. Yes, go. I'll be fine. Derek, his mother touched his shoulder. We'll try to see her, we'll be out that way. Thanks, I'd appreciate that. He truly would. If anyone could talk her down and bring sense back to her, it would likely be his mother, who still held Luna's rank in the pack. His pack wolves were still attracted to her and wanted to take comfort from her and listen to her advice. His father would be the other person she would listen to. He was the alpha she trusted, the man she had gone to and begged and pleaded for help when she was here last, had even shown him her pups through his gift, a risk that he would recognize them right away, a risk she had been willing to share with him in order to save herself. She trusted him. Other than her own parents, his were probably the best option to help in this horrid situation, which was getting worse by the minute it seemed. With every move he made, it seemed the more defiant his mate became. I will punish mate, when she comes home, Havoc growled. You will not, we need her happy and feeling safe. Derek shot back at him instantly. Havoc punishing her was not a good idea. When his beast was angered, everyone suffered. I will *ck her good and proper. Havoc chortled. Derek relaxed and couldn't help but laugh internally at his wolf. She might like that punishment. Havoc snorted at him. Want to hear mate's voice? Me too. Derek nodded, but would she pick up? Only one way to find out, he thought. She had to know after that last statement to expect him to call. Would be expecting a raging beast to scream at her down the line, he supposed. Jackson, give me your phone, I need to talk to her. Jackson stared at him. He would know why he was using Jackson's mobile. She would likely be screening for the pack number. Derek took the offered phone and it didn't surprise him that it read Kellen. He hit the dial button, listened to it state, please check the number and dial again, the number you have called is not in service. He frowned at it, handed the phone back. Stephen looked directly at him. I'm going to square away Kellen and the pup's protection detail, then simply left the office with long strides. Ethan stood. I'd better go and help him. He looks cranky and squaring away could mean kicking their asses to make sure they're up to the task. Derek nodded. Ethan could very well be right. That left just him and Jackson in the office. What a show! Jackson sighed with a shake of his head. You're not kidding. Derek agreed with him, walked over and sat down on his desk. Turned to the legal documents from her office and found the company's phone number. It was still office hours over there, barely. He dialed the number and asked to be put through to Kellen's secretary to make an appointment. He was put on hold and saw Jackson's questioning look. Pretense. I'm certain all our names are being screened for. He handed the phone over to Jackson. While on hold, she will likely talk to you rather than me. It took only a few minutes before he has actually put through to Kellen herself. Her secretary had caught his name and asked him to please wait on hold, didn't dismiss the call or tell him to get off. Jackson hit the speaker button, not that it was necessary. Derek's wolf's hearing was perfectly fine. Yes, Jackson, she simply asked. Nil hesitation in her voice. She knew they were going to call. What do you think you are doing, Kellen? Do you even know what you did today? He asked right back sternly but keeping all anger out of his voice. I did start this, Jackson. He did. He was the one who informed any wolf out there who happened to see his press conference that he had a weakness that could be exploited. Jackson frowned at her words. A weakness? This pups you didn't help by declaring yourself and the pups available for invitation into any pack that will accept you. I'm sure Elle will have plenty of offers rolling in, and quickly probably. She sounded slightly amused. Derek and Havoc were both angered by her flippant disregard for the safety of their pups. Damn it, Kellen, he roared, Unable to contain his beast or his own anger for that matter, she really needed to understand the danger she had just put herself into. The line disconnected before he could get anything else out. Chapter 13. She sat in her leather chair in her office and waited. The game of hardball had officially started. He had stupidly outed his children to the Wolfen Society, so she had declared herself a free agent that would entertain offers from other packs, and let the other packs know that he had tried to harm her, and that was why she needed a new place to go. Not exactly the smartest thing to do, but she was sure to find a pack that either had no connection to him or was affiliated and had an alliance of some sort, so she could have herself and the children protected. She would not have to tell him where she was either, just pledge her allegiance to the new Alpha and his pack, and then she would be gone from him and his Luna, who just wanted to hurt and punish her. Kellen knew there was a call coming. She was also pretty sure it wouldn't be him, probably Jackson. He was a smooth talker who could wheel and deal with the best of them. It had taken all of 15 minutes. She had already told Jordan, her secretary, to put him through but give her a quick heads up first. She took the call but hung up the instant she heard her Alpha yell at her, full of rage and anger. He would learn. She would not take his abuse anymore, would not be yelled at like that day either. Kellen waited again, knowing full well that it was not over. Jackson would call back after talking his Alpha down and his friend into shutting up for the next phone call. It was a good 7 minutes before Jordan, her receptionist, put the call through again. He apologized, stating that it must have been disconnected, somehow. Kellen laughed at his comment. "Don't apologize, Jordan, I hung up on him and will likely do so again. But I will not receive any more calls from him today. This will be the last one, no matter how many times he calls back." "Okay, Kellen." He apparently understood and seemed slightly amused. Kellen allowed Jackson to wait on hold a good 4 minutes before picking up again. "Now that you know I will hang up at will, keep him under control and in check. I presume he is still listening." She was playing a deadly game, throwing out orders for an Alpha, but he would learn she had rights. After all, he had tossed her away. "He is," Jackson confirmed, sounding angered with her now. He was losing his composure and clearly didn't like her attitude towards their Alpha. Unlike him, usually he was cool, calm and collected, not the hothead. His Alpha was, "If you hang up on me again, Kellen L will get on the next flight out there, and be at your door before you know it. Do you understand me?" Kellen frowned. She got the threat loud and clearly, but he'd be in her world, not his normal comfort zone. The rules were different here. "Is that so? Are you prepared to play human, Jackson?" "I've been playing human for a very long time now. I don't think you can do it. Apollo will hate it," she smirked. He was a beta and his wolf. Apollo was dominant and would demand respect just as much as his alphas did. She heard the growl and knew it was his wolf, Apollo. He was pissed right off. She had challenged his wolf's control with her statement. Kellen had grown up with him. If he thought she didn't recall how to push all of their buttons, he was sadly mistaken. "Oh, and if you think I haven't smelled a wolf here or there with pack scent on them since Elle got back from..." She left it unsaid. Allow them to wonder where she had been and who with. She didn't care. "Arya!" She heard Havoc roar her wolf's name so loudly she nearly jumped out of her skip. Arya nearly called his name back. Kellen barely had time to disconnect the call before Arya growled his name out of her. Lucky she had her finger on the disconnect button the whole time. "He called to us," she whined. "Our Alpha, yes. He wants to order you to bring your pups to him, Arya." "Maybe," she huffed. "No, he has a Luna, Arya. Don't mistake his intent, and his Luna hates us, one that will never tolerate our pup's existence. It's why we never told him in the first place, remember?" Yes, she huffed again. She did recall. and she remembered the pain of his tossing them aside like a piece of garbage. He did not want them. Not her and Arya, just his pups, nothing more. She was not willing, they were not willing to just hand them over and walk away from being their mother, which is probably what he wanted. It had been a long and stressful day, time to go home and see our babies. She knew that would make Arya happier. She loved her pups so much, being away from them annoyed her some days more than others, and today she was itching to get back to them and cuddle up with them on the couch and eat popcorn and watch a movie. Yes, let's go, Arya agreed. Home they went to do just that. Kellen stepped out of the elevator on the 12th floor of Stanton & Co. law firm where she worked, to find the scent of wolves on the floor, to find Jordan waiting for her right there at the elevator. That was a bit of a surprise. He didn't normally wait for her here. He also seemed anxious. "What's wrong, Jordan?" she asked. "There are so many messages this morning directed at you regarding your press conference statement, and people calling still trying to get appointments with you. It's kind of freaking me out, to be honest." Kellen laughed softly. "And so it begins. I was expecting this. Just take one call at a time and go with it, okay Jordan, just breathe. Oh, and don't tell Eric. I think he'll get very angry." Kellen," he said, walking behind her slightly as they finally moved from the elevator and down the hall towards her office and his desk. Goddess, had he already informed Eric? If so, the man was likely in her office. As she got to her office, there sitting on two of her waiting room chairs was none other than Beta Jackson and Gamma Steven. No wonder Jordan was so nervous. It was not an angry Eric. It was two wolves. They were both sitting there giving off auras of power. Jackson glared right up at her. She simply waited for Jordan to take a seat behind his desk. "How long have they been here?" she asked him. "They came up with me at 8, I did tell them you don't get until 9 today. They just sat and didn't move. Haven't said a word the whole time." Not to you," she thought to herself, "probably been sitting here talking through the mind link with each other the whole time they have been here." She took the stack of messages he was holding out. She steadfastly refused to acknowledge either of them. She stood flicking through the messages in a slow manner, appearing unfazed by either of them. There were many pack corporations requesting that she call them. She turned to her office door. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, glancing at Jackson, knowing full well that he did not. Jordan would have informed her already if they did. He was wearing a suit and tie, looked every bit the professional businessman as did Steven for that matter. She took in their appearances. They had gotten bigger in the past 6 years, must be working out way more. She had not really taken much in on her last visit to the pack, too scared and terrified of the punishment that had been awaiting her, to really get a good look at her old friends. "No, but you will see me, Kellen," he stated in a flat, no-nonsense tone, that implied he was going to get his way due to being the beta. "I have court most of today. I suggest you make an appointment and come back for it." She turned to Jordan once more. "Is there available space in my schedule tomorrow?" She didn't want a very pissed off beta losing it here, so she would show some respect and get him that appointment she had mentioned. 11:30 for 15 minutes. He nodded at her after checking. "Does that work for you?" she asked with a soft laugh and walked into her office and closed the door. She didn't really care if it didn't. This was her world and not theirs. She had shown respect, then dropped it away. She headed to the courthouse and found they followed her. Neither said a single word to her, just sat in the back of the courtroom and watched her do her job and go head to head with other lawyers on her client's behalf. At the end of the day, she returned home to see them follow her there as well. Annoying indeed. Even Arya was feeling smothered. They were so used to being able to do as they pleased when they pleased, without any pack interference or supervision, that this was bothersome and annoying. She wondered for a moment if this was what it felt like to be under police surveillance. She had not returned to her office after the last court session, had simply gone home, getting there just on 5 p.m., surprising her babies and the nanny, who got to go home early. It was 7 p.m. when her intercom buzzed. Kellen frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone this evening. Tim hadn't called for a visit. She shrugged and answered, "Yes, Jimmy." "Evening, Kellen, there are 2 people here that would like to come up." She sighed, "Probably Jackson and Steven," she thought. "Names please, Jimmy." She did like this building. Jimmy was a diligent doorman, and she could well imagine at this hour the night security guard Carlton would be standing by the front desk too. "Kellen, it's Blaine and Darla, may we come up?" Alpha Blaine's deep rumbling voice was heard through the intercom. Kellen was shocked, to say the least. She had not expected them to turn up here, at her apartment. It could only mean that Derek had told them about the triplets. She was not prepared to deal with them at all. Biting her lip, she was quiet for about 10 seconds, then drew in a long breath and steeled herself to do the one thing she had never done before: deny them their request. "No, I'm sorry," she said simply and as politely as she could, hoping not to incur their wrath at this time. "Kellen, honey, please." Luna Darla's voice came through the intercom softly, no hint of anger or order in it. "We'd just like to see our grandchildren is all." Kellen closed her eyes. It truly wasn't all that bad a request, but how could she know their true intentions? Once up here in her apartment, alone with her and the pups, either one of them could order her to hand them over, order her to do anything for that matter. They could order her to hand them over and stay behind, effectively removing her precious babies from her. "I'm sorry," she said again, and actually meant it, truly did mean it. She was sorry for denying them to see their grand pups. She shut the intercom off, before guilt ate away at her. She really didn't know who to trust anymore. First Jackson and Steven showed up, and now the former Alpha and Luna. He was really sending everyone. He couldn't come himself due to human court orders currently restricting him from leaving the state his pack was in. She also knew that his human world passport had to be handed over, so no traveling outside the US either. Eric had put conditions on him due to his wealth, stating the man was a flight risk due to his money. He could go anywhere to get away from the charges against him. The courts agreed. Eric was good at his job. Apparently, Derek had handed them over and was currently complying with human world restrictions. Kellen was about to order pizza for dinner when her phone rang. She glanced at it. Tim. He was one of the few people who had her new unlisted number. She picked it up. "Hey there." "Hi, sweets, thought LD drop by with pizza for dinner." "You're a lifesaver, I was actually just going to order pizza myself." "Great minds," he laughed. Kellen laughed too. "How far away are you?" "Just about to pull up outside your building." "Cheeky, aren't you? You know it, sweets. See you in a bit." He arrived 10 minutes later, and as he was on her approved list of visitors, he didn't have to be buzzed up. He brought 4 pizzas with him, knowing her and the kids ate like horses. It always amazed him how much they all ate, but he'd gotten used to it. She put the kids to bed around 9, and that just left her and Tim on the couch. It was so nice to just snuggle on the couch within him. His arm was draped around her. Arya seemed a little off by his presence tonight, but Kellen put that down to a lot that had been going on of late and today, especially what with Apollo and Rafe trailing them everywhere they'd gone, ever present with Jackson and Steven. It would only be natural for her to feel a little off with the wolves she used to hang out with nearly every day of her life, probably making her feel nostalgic and out of sorts. "Are you staying the night?" Kellen asked casually, curious if he was here to have sex. They hadn't in a while, actually not since her ordeal. She was a little on the antsy side, and was okay with him staying for SX. Arya huffed and retreated to the back of her mind. LD like to, but I have court in the morning and need to get up for an early start, not free till Sunday in all honesty. Okay, Jaya understood. She too had days where work exhausted her or she needed to rest completely before she knew a huge day in court was ahead of her. Though he was a prosecutor, his job was more demanding of his time and much more stressful than hers, and although SX was a good stress relief, she knew she could be very demanding in bed, and though Tim liked that about her, told her S*X was amazing, she knew he was always utterly worn out by her needs to be satisfied and he could be tired all day the next day, which left him feeling unable to do his job to the best of his ability. She smiled up at him. Sunday then. He laughed at her, tapped her nose. Definitely Sunday. He nodded. Wanna walk me out? He grinned at her. Kellen knew her children would be safe for 5 minutes while she walked Tim out to the front door and saw him off. He slid his arms around her waist once they stepped out the front door to the building. This was Tim's way of safely guarding himself from her needs. His mouth found hers for a deep kiss. Arya rolled her eyes and turned away in her mind. Kellen ignored her. She had needs too, wanted to feel wanted, and Tim did want her. She felt his hands slide down her, over her body and grab her bottom, squeezing it, and she pressed herself against him and ground her hips into his. He groaned and she smiled against his lips. You know you want to. I do. He pulled her harder against him and she sighed softly into his mouth. She knew what he liked and her antsiness just increased with the feel of him getting hard against her. He was turned on and she wanted that. To know she could make him want her, that he did want her, was a turn on for her. My sweet, please, I really do want to, but have a block day in court tomorrow, he groaned as she rocked herself against him harder, trying to convince him to stay. He pulled himself away from her a little reluctantly, his eyes slid over her body, totally checking her out. Kellen smiled and whacked his shoulder. You're going to convince yourself to stay at this rate, she said with a devious smile on her face. It was what she wanted right now. Tim grinned at her. He knew she was right. He shook his head as if to clear it, then turned and walked away. Any more banter and he wasn't going, and she knew it. She stood and watched him all the way to his car. He turned and looked at her, then yelled out, when are you going to marry me? Kellen yelled back, when you actually propose, and dropped a neat curtsy to which he bowed back. Then they both burst out laughing and he got in his car and drove away. Kellen returned to her apartment. At least once a month he waddled out at her. It had started 6 months ago and her reply was always the same. Neither of them were actually serious. Well, at least she didn't think so. She had been dating Tim for the past 2 years now. Neither of them had the inclination to move in with the other. She had 3 very rambunctious children. They did seem to like him and he them, but she had always avoided the topic of who their father was when he had brought it up. He didn't like that she wouldn't tell him. He no longer asked any more. She never really asked him about his family, just him. He had pursued her, and after doggedly chasing her for 6 months, Kellen had given him a chance. She knew she was never going back to the Wolfen Society, so she thought she might just try dating and see how she felt about it. Tim had turned out to be not only funny but charming and intelligent, and as his interests had aligned with hers, she'd found herself liking him quite a bit. It had been nice to have someone to talk to eat dinner with and go out of their way to make her laugh. S*X had come quite unexpectedly. Kellen had not planned to sleep with him, but one night 3 months into their dating he had pressed her up against the door roughly to his apartment as she had been about to leave, and kissed her hungrily, and her interest had somehow turned into want on need. She had now put it down to the roughness of it, and she had just latched onto him, grinding herself against him all of a sudden. She had wanted to be touched. It had been so long since anyone had touched her, desired her, and when she'd felt his hard erection against her abdomen as he had ground himself against her hard and firm, that had been enough for her needs to outweigh everything else. Arya hadn't fought her about it, surprising her. Wolves were all primal wants and needs, their S*X dive was high and they had not had anything in years. Kellen had moaned, "I want to have S*X right into his hungry kiss." He'd replied, "Thank God, so do I, sweets," and then he'd pulled her to his bedroom, and to his surprise she had practically ripped his clothing off, shoving him down onto his bed and climbing on top of him. Tim had barely enough time to put protection on before she had lined herself up with him and slammed down onto him, taking him herself hard and fast. She had ridden him hard that night. His hands had been her naked body, roaming everywhere, touching her all over. She had S*X with him 3 times that night, let him touch her, taste her, and rode out of him. It was good and sated some of her needs, but not all of them. Only a wolf could actually sate her fully, only a wolf could match her desires and needs. Tim was big for a human, but her last lover was bigger, hungrier, and more her desires and needs. Tim was big for a human, but her last lover was bigger, hungrier, and more insatiable, and would never stop till she'd been screaming herself hoarse and was utterly exhausted and unable to move afterwards. That bastard had ruined her for all others. Kellen strolled into her bedroom after checking on her babies, still safe and sound, and turned on the shower. She would have to settle for suiting her own needs today, and then wait for Sunday to come. She already knew Tim was going to be ridden, she was going to be on top and in control. It was normal for them, and Tim didn't seem to mind at all. Chapter 14. Derek POV. His phone rang. It was late, he'd been woken and wasn't sleeping well these days, and the few hours he did get, when he actually managed to fall asleep, were desperately needed. He glared at the stupid thing and wondered who invented such an annoying thing. The phone's display showed him it was almost L in the morning. Stephen's name glowing on the display. He glared at it. He had been asleep less than 2 hours, and he just knew whatever this phone call was, he was not going to be able to go back to sleep after it. He hit the answer button and then the speaker and buried his head back into his pillow, growling, "What? Boss, we got a slight problem, nothing too serious, human and all." He sighed. It was 10ish over there where he was. A human problem could only mean that he saw something he wasn't going to like, and the hesitation to spit it out annoyed him to no end. "Just say it, Stephen," he sighed as he desperately tried to keep sleep knocking. "Well, Kellen just came out of her apartment with some human guy. We saw him go in around 7 but didn't know he was going to see her. They looked well hot and heavy, boss, and there was a bit of a heated discussion between him and Jackson, a don't do it man, I have to, it's not a good idea kind of argument." Havoc was already filling with rage. "What?" the word was snarled out of him. More havoc than him, his wolf demand to know everything about his mate. He yelled out to her, "When are you going to marry me?" She replied, "When are you going to propose?" And that was it. Sleep was completely gone. He was only going to be coherent for a very short amount of time. Havoc was clawing his way out, wanting to destroy and kill everything that moved. Her not knowing he was her mate was infuriating, to say the least. Find out who he is and send a picture was all he managed to get out before Havoc took full control and his wolf was ripped out of him and bolted from the pack house to hunt and kill anything that moved. His rage was completely unchecked due to the shitty circumstances of their very situation. Neither he nor Havoc could blame the girl. She had no idea they were her mate, and who's to say this wasn't her boyfriend, and if it was, it would be normal for her and Arya to spend time with him. This thought did not placate his beast, In any way Havoc had tried to call to Arya, to let her know she was his mate and he wanted her, but Kellen had been in clear control and disconnected the call the minute Havoc had roared Arya's name. Whatever was going on in Kellen's brain, in regards to him and Havoc, appeared to override everything else. They had to gain some ground and soon, with the girl, or she was going to find herself hunted, forcibly marked and mated by his wolf whether she liked it or not. Derek would be hard-pressed to stop him if it came to actually seeing her in another man's arms, human or not. It wouldn't matter to Havoc at this point. He wanted his mate. He'd had her once before, they'd had her before and knew how good it was to be in bed with her, to hear her scream his name, to have her warm body draped on top of his or his curled around hers. And although Havoc and Arya had never actually mated each other, due to not being mates, he had gotten to sit back and watch as Derek had enjoyed touching every inch of the little she-wolf. She'd only been 19, he had been her first, had not surprised him, since he'd known her all her life, never had a boyfriend that he'd seen. She'd come home from a semester of university and had just been hanging out with him and the boys, but they had all peeled away with their current flings. It had been late on a Friday night and they'd been stretched out next to each other on his bed watching a movie in his room, something they had done 1,000 times before growing up. His wandering thoughts down memory lane seemed to be creating a noticeable change in Havoc's behavior, so he allowed himself to return to that night. He had looked down at her about to ask her if she wanted snacks or a drink and he'd caught her staring at him, lust and desire written all over her face. She'd looked away hurriedly, a fierce blush covered her cheeks and she had bitten her lower lip. He knew that look, had seen it aplenty of she-wolves. He, however, had never expected her to look at him with lust and desire. She couldn't hide it from him. He'd smiled and planned on teasing her, chiding her for having a crush on him. But when he had tilted her chin up with a single finger to make her look at him, something in him didn't want to tease her. Those green eyes of hers had trembled up at him with fear of rejection and he'd simply leaned down and kissed her softly, at first thinking to take it slow, see if she actually did want him or if she was simply curious as to what it was like to kiss an alpha wolf. He was expecting the latter. Derek noted Havoc had come to a standstill, calming down as he followed along with Derek's memory. The kiss had been soft and tender. He'd never seen her kiss anyone before, but she had. She parted her lips for his at the merest touch of his tongue, and when he'd slid his tongue into her mouth to deepen the kiss, she had not hesitated to slide hers along his. A part of him had actually felt a little disappointed he hadn't been her first kiss, but only barely. He'd watched her eyes flutter closed as he'd leaned his body over hers to fully deepen the kiss, to possess her mouth completely, and steal her breath away from her. Her hand had touched his face gently, sliding along his cheek to slip up into his hair. She had curled her fingers in it and pulled him even closer to he. He had allowed her to pull him closer. His body was reacting to their kiss a lot quicker than he had expected it to. He could smell her desire starting to fill the air around him. His hand had slid down her neck slowly, softly, and the moan that had come out of her directly into his mouth. He'd let out a soft growl back at her, unable to stop his primal response to the scent of her arousal and the soft M0an she had made so full of pleasure. Derek felt that Havoc had now settled himself down on the ground. His rage was ebbing away from him. Staying with the memory was good for him and his wolf. She was only wearing a pair of tights and had ground against her slowly, deliberately, firmly. He wanted her to know how she had turned him on and how hard he was for her. Even through his jeans she was enjoying the feel of him. His hands pushed at her shirt until it was up and off of her altogether. Her whole body was hot to the touch, and then they started. Her green eyes had finally opened slowly to look up at him. She hadn't seemed to be self-conscious about what had just happened, had just smiled up at him and then pulled his mouth back to hers. He recalled whispering her name, his tone full of need to take it further. she knew what he was asking and reached up to pull his shirt off. He needed an answer from her, he wanted to hear her say it, and to say she wanted him, even though her body was screaming for his. Her AR-0USAL filled his senses. He had a deep-seated need to actually hear her say the words. She looked up at him with those jewel-green eyes of hers and whispered, "Yes, Alpha." Goddess, she knew how to turn him on. He moved back to her on the bed, his eyes were locked onto hers, he really just wanted to slam into her so hard, and bury himself so deep inside her, but hesitated. "Have you ever?" She had shaken her head indicating no. "I want to with you," she'd said, up at him, her voice soft and filled with need. "It's okay, I am ready," she assured him. He smiled down at her, she thought she asks, but if she'd never, she wasn't ready for him. He would hurt her, he would deny himself for now, he'd pushed his tongue inside of her, tasting all of her and wanting more. "Please," begged him, "I want you, please." Her words had been his undoing, he moved his body over hers, his mouth finding hers, letting her taste herself on his tongue as she had done to him, and finally got what he wanted. He'd slipped from her body and lay down next to her on his bed, his breathing ragged and heavy, his body slick with sweat, one hand flung up over his head as he tried to recatch his breath. He'd looked over at her, his lifelong friend, now his lover, and prayed this wouldn't ruin their friendship. Her eyes were closed, there was a smile on her lips, she was breathing as hard as he was. He watched her for many minutes as she had regained herself to normal, till her eyes had opened, she had turned them on him and bit her lip nervously, he had smiled at her. "You're amazing," he'd said with all honesty. Havoc was practically purring at this moment, the shared memory of what it was like to be with their mate had calmed his beast right down. He gave control back to Derek and relinquished his body and settled in the back of Derek's mind, calm and sleeping. Derek headed for the pack house. It took him an hour to walk there, but he didn't mind. To be honest, the night air was crisp and had a hint of rain in it. He looked up. Clouds filled the sky, soon it would be snowing, winter was on its way. Most days and nights were filled with clouds now. A deep chill permeated the air all day, every day, and even more of a night. He walked into the mud room, showered and headed for his bedroom in nothing more than a towel. It was late and there was no one about, especially with his parents and brother off to sort out his human mate and placate her family. His Beta and Gamma were watching his mate, it was just Ethan, and his two sisters. Holly, just 5 years old, was upstairs with a nanny due to his parents being away, and his other sister 2 years his junior, Abby, who was mated to Jackson's little brother Johnny, so lived on the Beta floor. He pulled on pants and grabbed his phone and headed back downstairs. Sleep was not going to happen even though Havoc was now out cold his mind. He had to look at the photo he knew was waiting for him, a human man, his mate's possible lover. It was the only time to do it, with Havoc sleeping. It would keep his raging beast at bay, and stop him from ripping out of him all over again. Derek opened his phone. There was one message awaiting him. From Stephen, as expected, he opened it. There was a photo of a man, tall, probably 6 feet, nothing to his 6'6". He was wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt, standing next to a car. Derek was thankful that it was just the man and not the two of them together. This man had dark hair, a standard short back and sides haircut, and was smiling. He guessed at Kellen. He was standing next to a silver Mercedes, not the latest model, but still on the expensive side, a luxury car. Kellen, it seemed, had surrounded herself with wealthy, good-looking humans. He was handsome by human standards. It was clear that the man worked out. He had broad shoulders and a tapered waist. Derek sighed. How was it Kellen could surround herself by all the humans that were considered good-looking or handsome by human standards? He knew she was beautiful, smart, and funny, but why was it so darn hard for men to stay away from her? Derek knew wolves were attractive to humans, eye candy and a half. He'd used his good looks, himself to get his way, when around female humans. If there was trouble brewing between any unmated males of his pack and the humans, especially in the department, human fathers were just as protective of their daughters' virtue as were wolfen parents. There was no name attached to the photo. Derek hit Steven's number. It was nearly 4 in the morning. His voice was groggy. "Yeah, boss. Got a name. Timothy James Bolton. He's a prosecutor with Starton & Co. law firm." Derek rubbed his hands over his face. Just great, more freaking lawyers and this one talking about marriage. He hung up, not wanting to know more at this point. He would sit and investigate the man himself, seeing as he awake and sleep was long gone. At least his beast was out of the picture for the moment. So he could at least do a thorough job and uninterrupted. He knew Stephen had more to impart but didn't want to hear it, to be honest. He had enough to deal with. His parents had reported that she would not see them. Jackson and Stephen had followed her around all day and she had completely ignored them, going about her human world job. She had spent the day in and out of courtrooms. Apparently very good at her job, but he would expect nothing less from his Luna. Then a human male in her apartment for 3 hours with her and his pups. Goddess only knew what time the pups had gone to bed and how long she had actually been alone with him. Though 3 hours was not long by wolf standards, he'd been with her for longer than that. He could FK all night with minimal rest intervals, sometimes no rest at all needed, just a change of position in her scent, and he'd been completely insatiable at times. The poor girl had spent many a nights, gasping and panting, screaming herself hoarse, and then had to sleep half or the whole of the next day to recover. A smile played on his lips as he thought about it. He could easily bring to mind at the moment, time spent with her. Once upon a time, he couldn't even recall it when he had been mated to Sophia. He had never thought about her, not once. The mate bond was like that, but now that Kellen was his mate he seemed to be able to recall every pleasure she had brought to him and every M0AN, cry and scream he had elicited from her. Shaking his head he pulled himself back to the present. "We've got work to do," he told himself. Derek googled the man. Timothy Bolton, 35 years old. Never married. Had been working with Eric Stanton since he was 27 and just a lawyer, becoming a prosecutor at 31. The man, it appeared, to come from a well-to-do family, and when he researched further, the Boltons were affiliated with the Stantons. Eric's younger sister Emma was married into the Bolton family at the age of 20, she was 30 now. So it was likely Eric had hired Timothy due to family relationships, to keep everyone happy. Nothing like a good wealthy alliance. No different to if Abby, his sister, had been mated to a wolf in another pack. There would have been an alliance made between the two pack alphas to protect his sister, who was of Alpha BL0D and would have strong pups which would, in turn, strengthen the pack she went off to. Depending on the rank of her mate as to the alliance that would be made as well. Humans were no different in arranging marriage alliances between wealthy families with companies to protect, writing up strong prenups, each trying to get the better deal for their offspring in the event the marriage didn't work out or was a disaster and ended in divorce. Just the type of thing Kellen specialized in, and he was certain she would be good at it, having grown up in wolfen society where everything was built on or around pack alliances and deals to help out or protect other packs. She had been around and heard some of what he was learning about when growing up and allowed to be in meetings when on semester break or home for the weekends. Due to that she was going to work in the legal department with contract law, it was not an issue to let her see and learn firsthand how it worked. She would have been one of the ones to assist with writing up the clauses and sorting out current agreements if not for his stupid and thoughtless order that fateful day. She was going to make a great Luna. Not only was she beautiful, but she was very bright, quick-witted and intelligent. It appeared from what he had learned over the past few weeks, methodical, ethical and honest. She was determined and stubborn, not to mention defiant. She was likely going to be a handful, but he liked a challenge. He shook his head. She was his defiant mate, so resistant to anything that might bring harm to her pups, even her alpha. Going up against an alpha was a death wish. If she wasn't his mate, he'd probably have just locked her up the minute she had announced she had unregistered pups and sent someone to get her pups. They were unregistered with the pack and all pups needed to be accounted for and protected. He sighed, not wanting to follow that train of thought. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.